do we move from I to we, from resistor to co-creator, and from protect to partner at work and in life? And why do we bother with all of this?
Because we want to build shared trust, enable knowledge flow, seek alignment. Really, we just want to have an easier life. I'm Karen.
And I'm Nula, and we are the Safety Collaborators. Our mission is to help people have better conversations and change the way they think about safety. Today, we are going to pull together the wisdom of the conversational intelligence, or C-IQ journey, by exploring the conversational dashboard and considering how we pivot from low to high trust and what is the impact on us as individuals as well as on our teams. This is episode 6 of our C-IQ series, and so far what we have covered is in episode 38, the introduction, and we shared the learn activity with you. In episode 39, we had a look at the 5 essentials of conversational intelligence. In episode 40, we dove into the 3 levels of conversations. Episode 41, foundations of trust. And episode 42, we did a bit more of a discussion and understanding around the neuroscience of conversations and what that means to us. And if you're joining us for the first time, here's an overview of what conversational intelligence, referred to as C-IQ, is all about. Conversational intelligence is the hardwired and learned ability to connect, navigate, and grow with others. A necessity in building healthier and more resilient organizations in the face of change. C-IQ begins with trust and ends with a high-quality relationship and business success, in the words of Judith Glaser. Now we are going to delve into part 6 of the C-IQ series, bringing it all together under the umbrella of the conversational dashboard. So what is the conversational dashboard?
Let me share with you one of my favorite tools. I use it a lot, and it's a really lovely way to help teams visualize how they might be feeling as individuals and then as a group. It helps us to visualize levels of trust and where we're operating from, and to create the conversations around those feelings and levels of trust. It's quite complex in reality, but when we look at it, it sort of makes sense. But of course, as with any of these tools, or when it comes to how we are as human beings, it's actually far more complex than the image gives us. When you look at it, it's an arc, and we go from red through to orange, yellow, blue, green. We will have an image of this on the show notes so that you can visualize this yourself, and we highly recommend that you go back and have a look at those when they go live. So, the 6 words that are key in all of this are resistor, skeptic, wait and see, experimental, and co-create. Again, come with me on a bit of a visualization journey. In the red zone, we're starting off at resistance. We move from resistance into skeptic. We then move into that wait and see moment. Then we move around to the right into experimental and co-creator. What that's telling us is that when we're in resistor or skeptic mode, we're actually operating from a position of low trust. As we move up into the wait and see, we're moving into conditional trust. And then as we move round to the right to experimental or co-creator, we're moving into levels of high trust. In the last episode, we talked more about neuroscience and the wisdom of the 6 brains and the impact of that. So if you think about that, when we're operating from a place of resistance or skepticism, we're actually operating from a more primitive side of our brain where distrust lives. So our primitive brain, that's where our amygdala lives. That's where we start to think of how do we protect ourselves. So part of this arc is how do we move ourselves from self-protection into partnering with others. So again, as we move through to the right-hand side, the experimental co-creator, we then start operating from our prefrontal cortex or our more executive brain. And therefore, this is where high trust lives. So when we're looking at the if you're using your head as an example, the back of my head, if I'm operating from the back of my head, I'm operating from low trust. And if I'm operating from my front of my head, I'm operating from high trust.
And I think it goes from, moving from instinct and that first reaction. If you think about what we spoke in episode, I think it was 41, when we spoke about the foundations of trust,
Yeah.
to moving forward to choice and saying, okay, hang on, I have more choice in this, and I can take a step back and see where I'm at from a more logical perspective. And why am I feeling low trust? What's happening here? And what do I need to do to move around the arc to go from red to green?
When we're in that red zone, if you think about it again, if you cross your arms and you're covering your chest. Now, I'm not suggesting that every time we do that, we're trying to protect ourselves. Sometimes it's just comfortable. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, if you were in a room full of people and you've got a few people sitting in the chairs and they've got their arms crossed and leaning a bit back in their chair, you could possibly assume that they are working from some form of resistance or skepticism or wait and see. They're sort of, okay, we're checking out what else is being said here, not so sure. So therefore, I'm going to, metaphorically, if you like, protect myself, and I'm not trusting everything that's being said right now. Whereas you may have another person in that same meeting who just thinks whatever's going on in this discussion is fantastic, and they're leaning forward, they're probably bright-eyed, they're probably looking up at whoever's speaking, and now they think, oh, I like what this person's saying, so now I'm a little bit more operating from a high trust, or I'm ready to engage and to experiment with that person, with those ideas. So when we move around this dashboard and when we put it up there as a visual, it's actually quite a nice thing to do at the beginning of a meeting or at the beginning of a workshop, and we'll talk more about in a minute. You can really see it where people are, and the more that you practice working your way through the dashboard and those levels of trust, and how do we prime for trust, how do we build trust. Interesting, a key component of this is listening. What are you listening for? What are you hearing? What are you hearing in yourself? What are you hearing in others?
And what are you not hearing?
And what are you not hearing? So I think what's really important here is when we're operating from that I perspective, which is what happens when we go into protect mode, we are then closing ourselves down potentially from opportunity. Whereas the further we move around to the right, and we start to move into, okay, we're going to work together a bit more. So how do we move into that we mode? We're now opening ourselves up for opportunity. And essentially, that's what it's trying to tell us.
When we think about that from, just conversations we've experienced, when I think of resistor and skeptic, it's one of, I've seen a few different examples of this in conversations. Sometimes it's shut off and I will not speak. I don't engage in the conversation. Or you see people who just go quiet. Other times it's, almost that kind of, this is a waste of time. Why are we here? We've tried things in the past. This is never going to work. I don't even know why we're bothering to put this up as an option. You guys, if you want to buy into this, you do it. I'm going to hang back. I don't want to be involved. I'm going to wait and see if something happens. And if by some miracle there's movement forward, I may think of being involved.
Exactly. Funny enough, brings in the mood framework into this as well. If I'm in a place of resignation, that wait and see is like, same thing, different day type thing.
So much so. Yeah. And yet when you start moving into that experimenter co-creator, it doesn't mean that there's immediate cohesion and that every idea is great.
Not at all.
But there's that opening of conversation and going, I think you and I experience it quite often where, one of us will throw something in and the other one will be like, oh, I'm not so sure about that. Oh, but how about if we tweak it or we twist it or we change it? How would it look like? How would it land in this sense? So it becomes that people are more comfortable to give their ideas because they're going to be heard, and even if they're not great, they're still going to be acknowledged, and they know it will inspire, that co-creator, that experimenter to come out with a better option at the end of it.
We look at the actual words from a C-IQ perspective. Resistor just simply means that we're not feeling that alignment. The skeptic means that we're out of alignment and coming from a little bit from a place of doubt. The wait and see is we're going to wait and see what the other person says. What else? What are the others in the room committing to? An experimental means, okay, there is something here that's triggering me. It's building a desire within myself to move forward and to do something together. And when we talk about co-creation, and I think what you just described very well, is that we build new meaning. So we start at one point, we end up in a new place, and then we have that reinvigorated meaning, if you like. When we spoke in the previous episode, we talked about the levels of conversation as well. So when we overplay that, or play the two together, if you like, what does that mean? When we're in that level 1 type of conversation, which is quite transactional, it means it's about giving information and is characterized by low trust. So that level 1 type of conversation, that telling, that asking, tends to be operating from the left-hand side of the dashboard. In the middle is positional. Yeah, wait and see. I might inquire, I might try to persuade, I might do one of two different things. So that's what we call level 2. And then, of course, when we move over all the way over to the right, then it's that whole level 3 style of conversation, which is that sharing, discovery together, building new meaning, all of those things, and tends to be from a place of high trust.
And those are all important, as you have mentioned so many times before, because often when we're resistant to change, it's because we don't have enough information. We don't know enough. So sometimes I need to be given information. So
Quite true.
You need to tell me so that I can actually ask questions before I can move into actually being more exploratory, because I don't know what I don't know. And sometimes that's a place where we need to start. When you think of somebody new to the industry, they might be quite resistant to all these safety rules and safety regulations. Why do I have to wear earplugs? Why do I have to wear a hard hat? What's the importance of walking around with gloves on? I'm just walking down the deck. So it's around, well, then sometimes we need to give that information and then be able to move into, okay, now the person has more to be able to advocate and inquire, and then become a part of the solution rather than just being a resistor or skeptic as to what this is there for.
Nicely said. We also, part of this dashboard, we talk a lot about how do we, and I think following on from what you've said, as leaders or team members, we have these conversations with people. How do we have the right conversation for the right moment to help move people along or to help the team to move into the direction it wants to grow into? But we also have to look at ourselves. So how do we, and I'm going to use the terms down-regulate and up-regulate what's going on inside of us. So how do we self-manage our emotions and where we are on that dashboard? So we may come into a room and feel, it could be because we're not feeling so great today. So we sit there and we're a little bit resistant to whatever's going on. I don't want another meeting. I don't want to be part of this. Why do I need another safety conversation, etc. So the question then is, well, okay, how do we give people the tools, if you like, to do this for a start? But how do I then look at myself and go, I need to move myself out of this mood, if you like, and how do I upregulate my resistance? And when we think about things like that, it's, okay, am I withholding information, for example? How do I move myself into sharing? So in previous episodes, we talked about cortisol and oxytocin. So when we're in that resistance mode or that skepticism mode, we tend to have higher levels of cortisol running through the system because we might not be feeling so great, or we've just started somewhere new, so there might be some fear involved. There's uncertainty. I'm not sure about what's going on around me. I don't know people, so I'm not feeling part of the team yet. So there could be some elements of feeling excluded or lack of belonging, might be a better word, rather than exclusion, but, a lack of belonging at this moment. So all of these other elements play in at that point. And generally when that's happening, we've got some adrenaline running, we've got high levels of cortisol happening, and what are the ways that we can then down-regulate that? And the way to do that is to look for the happy moments, if you want. What's going to make me feel good? So look for that. And it might be actually as simple as finding that one friendly face, that friendly person, and have a conversation with them. That'll help you lift, that'll help you feel better. It's what do you want to focus on as well. So there's what's the big picture, but then there's also how do we self-manage from within. The more that we can manage, and particularly if we're leaders and we need to be helping others, we need to have an awareness of what's going on within ourselves. So sometimes we can look at the dashboard and go, yep, I'm operating from that left side. How do I move myself to the right so that I can go out and have more transformational conversations?
Give me 5 minutes, I'll come back in the room as a different person.
Exactly.
Hold that thought.
Exactly. And sometimes it is just doing just that. So we looked at priming for trust. We've looked at conversational essentials. We've looked at the foundations of trust. We've looked at the conversational matrix, which is the levels 1, 2, and 3. All of these tools together combined with the dashboard help us to self-manage, to regulate and to co-regulate with others as well. We love the dashboard, and I've used it in a multitude of ways, and sometimes very complex and sometimes very basic. Sometimes I simply have the arc with the words and nothing more, which leads us to offshore.
Yes. And there we've used it as simply as the arc with just smiley faces, because it's around you just doing that check-in, and it's more of a quantitative check-in, because it's not a case of going, well, let's guess where people are. Sometimes it's really helpful to say, if you're working with a group of people and you are picking up that energy that just isn't great, or something just isn't working, it might be that people are feeling resistant or skeptic or wait and see, that they're not diving into this whole, new vision or way of being, or the change that is taking place. So how do you ask them without putting them on the spot? And one of the ways we've done that is a Google form with a QR code, put it up all over the place with the graphic of the arc, smiley faces on it, and go, how are you feeling today? Or how are you feeling about this change? And allowing people to go in and anonymously respond to where they are at. So you get this temperature check that is exactly how people are feeling. And what's quite interesting is that, sometimes it does take a little bit of encouragement, because if you are only getting, like experimenter, co-creator, but the numbers are quite low from the amount of people that are on board, it answers the question for you anyway.
It does. Yeah.
Because people are feeling resistant and skeptic to not even actually want to tell you how they are feeling. And then you can go and do a bit more of a qualitative check-in, go and do those one-on-one conversations like, what's happening with you? How's your team doing? And then start building up. Well, then, okay, now what do we want to do from that going forward? How do we take this very rich data and then go, okay, how do we prime for trust a little bit more?
Yeah.
How do we open up the conversation? Maybe people are feeling excluded, or they're feeling their ideas have been judged or criticized, or that it's being pushed on them. I didn't have a say in this. I just have to do it because I've been told. Okay.
Yeah.
Now how do we go to let's get people to feel included, ask their opinions? It doesn't mean that things are going to change, but it means that people feel that they have been heard. And sometimes being heard and saying, I don't like this, is more important than going, we can change it. It's just acknowledging, okay, you're not feeling comfortable in this change. This is the direction that we are going in. How can we help you become more comfortable in this and move people into that experimenter? So that's one of the ways. I
think something you've just said is really important. All of these tools and, a lot of the conversations that we're having here are not about, I think there's a fear that people think everybody has to like everything that's going on every day. We own our own business. That doesn't mean we like everything that we have to do. No. It's not at all, It is, sometimes you've just
got to do it.
You just got to do it. But it's about how do you put yourself in a place where you're okay with that, that you're feeling like, okay, it's part of the gig.
Yeah.
I'm not resisting it. There's no point.
No, where you move from resistor to choice.
Yeah, I think that's nice. Yeah. I remember years ago, in some deep, dark past, I actually was a nurse. And back then we make beds and do all those sorts of things. And to this day, I still hate putting on pillowcases, by the way. But I hate it. I love my hospital corners. I really love those, Thank God for elasticized sheets. But I still hate putting on pillowcases. But there's no point in resisting it.
You just got to do it.
It's part of the job. Yeah. You've just got to do it. And so we know that there are jobs that all of us, doesn't matter what role, what location we are in, there will always be a little bit of ew. That's life.
It is.
So we don't want anyone to think that everything has to be
Sunshine and roses.
sunshine and roses. Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it.
And
Yeah.
I think I've
Right.
said this to you before, is that what we forget about roses is that in order to enjoy the beautiful scent and the blooms, we have to put up with the thorns.
They need thorns. Exactly.
Thanks for listening. We are all about helping you. So why not drop us a line at hello@safetycollaborations.com and see what we can do for you. Back to the conversation. One of the things that I think is so important to maybe go into a bit more deeper is that moving from I to we.
Yeah.
And I think so often when we're on that resistor skeptic side, it's because I feel alone. I have to do it. Or I am having it done to me.
Yes.
Instead of we are in this together. And, you know, we are co-creating, we are finding a way, we are experimenting, and it becomes, how do we make this happen in a better way? It doesn't mean that 100% of people are going to be on board and go, yes, this is the way we're doing it. But when we walk out of the room, that everyone's gone, I've been heard, and it may not be the way that I would do it, but I understand that we have agreed that this is the way we're going to do it. So as a leader, I will support it when I walk out the door. And if I don't like it, I will come and speak to one of my other leaders and say, I'm battling with this. I will not take the way that, they really should have done it my way, down to my team. Because as leaderships, we need to stand as a united front. We've agreed this. Now we're going to go and make it happen as a we.
Watch this space. The next series might be on leadership.
Damn fine idea.
So talking about that, one of our other big programs that we run, which is a global safety leadership program, and we actually run this, it's facilitated digitally, so it's in-person virtual. And we use it a lot. Actually, I've used it in nearly all the programs I've run in the last 5 years, the dashboard. Sometimes it's, as we've done on the rig, just an arc with smiley faces. But generally, because this is a leadership program, we do go into more depth, and we really do take a temperature check of where they are at the beginning of a program. So if you think about it, for facilitators out there that might be listening, it's a really nice way to take a temperature check of where are we today. You've been told to come to this program, and I use the word told because we work in a world where most people are voluntold. They're not willingly always coming to these programs that we run. So we tend to take a temperature check at the beginning, and it might be that you have a poster of the dashboard and some sticky notes if you're in the room together, and you say, okay, where are you on this dashboard? And then just leave it. And then we come back to the conversation about it a bit later. And then again at the end of the day, okay, have you moved? Are you still there? So sometimes a bit, how do you feel about coming on this workshop? How do you feel about coming to this rig? How do you feel about coming to wherever you're going to? People really like it because then we go into the deeper conversation around trust and what that means, and as a inbuilt risk assessment. So when we think about trust just there, if you think about what we've been talking about in this dashboard, you've got low trust, conditional trust, high trust. It's also our personal inbuilt risk assessment, this trust thing that we talk about. So if I'm not trusting a situation, well, what am I going to do to close myself down versus being high trust where we open ourselves up? So many ways to use this.
At the beginning, we asked the question, how do I move from I to we, resistor to co-creator, and protect to partner at work and in life?
Yes.
Maybe it's helpful to share a little bit of a case study or a story from a work perspective. How could we use this?
Let's do a bit of reflection here. Let me set the context. You are a leader and you want or need to have a one-on-one conversation with one of your team members. The situation is this. Your team member is a very dominant character in the way that they impose things on others without realizing the impact they are having. So they are quite quick on the uptake and draw conclusions way too quickly than maybe others around them. And from your perspective, you can see that it's impacting other team members and therefore who are starting to operate from a position of low trust. So one person on a team can have an enormous impact. So you recognize this as the leader, and what do you do about it?
And what do you want to do? What do you want the outcome to be?
We're going to put this little case study and the questions, everything again in the show notes so that you can actually reflect on this. So let's assume your aspiration as the leader want to help your team member to become aware of the impact that they're having on others, and you want them to improve their relationships and how they approach others without coming across as so directive and maybe overly dominant. And the purpose for that is because you need the team to work and function more effectively. And you can recognise this. It's funny, as I'm speaking through this, it's reminding me of a situation many, many years ago. I had a sales team and I had one person who just threw the entire team off all the time. And they were a bit narcissistic. They were that sort of person. In that particular instance, and back then with lack of knowledge on my behalf, I removed her from the team completely, which had its other ramifications. But interestingly enough, that particular outcome is not the one that we're advocating here. It did actually improve the team.
And I think part of the work that we do is around how we get to grow and learn, and we can reflect back on previous experiences and go, I wish somebody had given me these tools to be able to do things in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's why we're doing what we do, to share the wisdom.
Absolutely. And that's why I've been on a 25-year journey since those days of learning and self-reflecting. And by the way, just quietly, that journey never ends.
But it touches on a really key point there, is that before, as a leader, before you even go into this conversation with your team member, how do you prepare yourself? Because what are the things that could get in the way for you to have a conversation that matters?
Correct. Yeah.
So it might be things like reflecting on how are you feeling about entering this conversation, and use the dashboard. Am I resistant or am I open to experimenter? What do I need to do to prepare myself to, move to co-creator or experimenter? And, that might be just sitting down for like 5-10 minutes and literally preparing yourself. What do I need to do? Where am I at? What are the next steps? Bringing in those 5 essentials that we discussed. So how am I priming for trust? What questions do I need to ask for which I have no answers? How am I going to, in this situation, listen to connect, not judge or reject where my teammate is at? How do I bring in my conversational agility? And when my subordinate or my team member says something that maybe I need more information on, how do I double click on it and say, help me make sure that we are on the same path in understanding this? And our most favorite one, always remember to be open to influence.
And what we mean by that is that people, you may not entirely like what you hear. You may not always even agree. So be mindful of your own listening, the conversation. So part of your preparation is, okay, I'm feeling all these things, I've got these thoughts, but I need to push them to the side. Put them to the side until you have that other person's point of view, their point of view. Because in this particular scenario, they may not even have an inkling of the challenge that they're causing.
They might be obliviously unaware and thinking that they are doing an amazing thing as a team member.
Exactly. They're pushing things forward and they're
getting things done.
They now may not realise that people think they're a bully in some ways.
So as a coach, or not even a coach, but as a leader, what are some of the tips that you would give leaders out there? What are some of the questions that they could ask to have this conversation?
We think really, you may have more, but here is just a bit of a short list, if you like, of some of them. So first of all, definitely start to build a little rapport. Set the scene for the conversation, because it may be coming a little bit out of the blue. So you need to sort of set the scene, why we're having the conversation. What are some of the things that you have observed and why we're here? Share your observations. Then ask, how are they experiencing? How do they feel that these observations, are they real for them? As I said, maybe the first time they're even hearing it. Or you might get back, yeah, I know I can be a bit like that. So depending on what reaction you get to your observations and the purpose for this conversation may then take you down which path do you go. There's usually a fork in the road here. How do they think that others experience them? So ask them, how do they think they show up within that team? What impact they might be having? Share the dashboard with them. So, okay, where are you? We're in this conversation. You now have to explain it a little bit, because if they're not seeing it, if it's not something that's common within your team, then you may need to bring in that dashboard. But we highly recommend that people use it in their teams often, even if it's at the beginning of a meeting or at the end of a meeting. Ask them where they're feeling. Where do they think they are within the team? How is this playing out for them? Where do they think the productivity levels are? Probably more importantly, once you have that sort of a conversation, and through all of this, obviously you're not throwing a whole bunch of questions at them, you're listening to connect, you're listening to hear what's coming back at you so that you know what the next helpful question might be, whatever it is. The whole point of this conversation is you as a leader is using some of these tools to maybe help you navigate sometimes the not so pleasant conversations that we have to have. Understand that you also will have reactions before you even go into these conversations. And these tools can be there for you to use as a leader, as an individual, and then to also open it up to the whole team and the group within the organisation. So we'd really love to know how you might approach this conversation. So do share those thoughts with us. You can catch up with us on our website, on our podcast platforms, all sorts of places. We do appreciate your feedback and love learning with you. And at this moment, I'd like to do a shout out to Gillian Fowler for her feedback on episode 40. She loved it and she's been sharing it everywhere, and we encourage you to do the same. So we're delighted that she found this podcast so interesting and enjoyed those takeaways. So just a little reminder, we are actually certified C-IQ facilitators and coaches, hence we talk about it a lot, and we love to share these tools with people and have conversations with you.
Going back to Judith Glaser, who started this conversational intelligence journey, and she said conversations are the golden threads that keep us connected to others. And as a certified C-IQ coach, you became part of the European C-IQ collective, and you've had many interesting conversations, shared experiences, and events with other certified C-IQ coaches in the collective. Mm-hmm. And what has inspired me is that through these conversations, you've come together as a group to share examples and lessons in authoring not just one, but 2 conversational intelligence founded books. And I would love if you could share with us a little bit more about the Changing Conversations for a Changing World experience.
So the C-IQ European Collective, of which I'm a member of, we've been together since 2016. So since the first cohorts of C-IQ certified coaches came into being. And we came together, it was actually started by a friend of mine, Tanya Ilabach-Murphy, and it was started by her because she really wanted to be able to continue those conversations after our learning. So we came together. We actually still meet monthly, in fact, and now that we're back into travelling, we have yearly retreats where we actually, a few of us get together from around the world, across the globe, and we have week-long 3-day to 5-day events together and share the lessons that we get from the worlds that we work in, because we all work in different backgrounds,
industries
and environments, and it's really interesting. So we decided during the lockdown period, as you do, to run a virtual event called Changing Conversations for a Changing World, which was hugely successful. But during that, just before that, we decided to write our first book together. And 15 of us authored the first book, Changing Conversations for a Changing World, hence the event came after that with that name. And then 18 months later, we wrote the second one, which is also Changing Conversations for a Changing World, Volume 2. So I had a chapter in each book. The first book is a chapter on how do we build trust for a safer world, which was chapter 9, and talks a lot about the conversational dashboard, in fact, and how I used it in a behavioural training on a construction site. So it tells that story. And in the second book, which is chapter 2, I actually talk about how we converted a traditional 2-day safety leadership program into a globally, digitally facilitated one, and where we use all of these tools as well. So They were fun to do. We're already talking about maybe doing another book, but this time from Safety Collaborations.
Watch the space.
Maybe next year. Exactly. So, and of course, you can get this book at any Amazon site, to be honest, either in a Kindle version or a paperback version. And we'd love for you to get it. We'll also put some links in the show notes to those.
And those were 2 fabulous chapters, which were very insightful and full of wonderful tips and learning. And the rest of the authors also contributed some great stuff. So I can highly recommend the books from a personal perspective.
I think what's really nice about these books, actually, is that you do get, in the first one, 15 different perspectives. And the same in the second one, actually, which was 10. So you get really interesting perspectives on how to build trust, how to use some of the tools.
And C-IQ in practice.
Yeah, C-IQ in practice. Exactly.
So I think that brings us to the end of our series on conversational intelligence.
It does.
And I love your idea of, let's dive into some leadership in the next few episodes. I think that would be highly valuable.
I think so too. And we'll still talk about some of these tools, because some of these tools are really important leadership tools. So there's a few more we may introduce into this. This series really just covered the basics.
Very much.
Yeah.
Tip of the iceberg.
As always, thank you for joining us today, as it's always lovely to have conversations that matter. Connect with us on our website, safetycollaborations.com. You will find all the show notes for this episode and links to all the previous podcasts in the series. Leave us a message. We have a live chat bot on the site. We'd love to hear from you. And you, of course, you can always follow us on LinkedIn. You can find Nuala Gage or Karen Avari. There's both of us. There's only one of each of us on LinkedIn, only in the world, luckily for us. So we're pretty easy to find. So if you enjoyed this podcast, you can also help us by spreading the word, by sharing it, by following or subscribing on your favourite podcast platform. It's something we focused on a little bit just before this episode today. We were talking about Spotify, because Spotify actually allows you to directly comment on each episode. So we'll look out for you there as well. And so till next week, stay safe and stay well.